Hey guys, in today's video, get ready for a captivating story that will transform the way you see the spiritual world. Let's meet Seraphine Caldwin, a woman who was in a serious car accident and, in her near-death experience, had an encounter with Jesus who revealed a surprising secret about the true power of fasting. What she saw on the other side is something you need to hear. So, before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any incredible stories like this. Now, get ready for an exciting journey that will stir your soul. My name is Seraphine Caldwin, and the story I'm going to tell begins at a time when I was completely lost. It had been just over a year since I lost my parents in a plane crash. The pain was immeasurable, as if a piece of my soul had been ripped away. I tried to fill the void in every way: therapy, work, even escapism through series and books, but nothing seemed to bring relief. It was then that I connected with Pastor Gideon Vance, a wise and patient man who, for the first time in a long time, was able to listen to me without trying to fix my pain. He was the one who suggested I consider fasting as a way to reconnect spiritually. At first, I found the idea absurd. "I'm already broken enough, Pastor. I don't think going without food will help," I told him, half joking, half irritated. He smiled kindly, as he always did, and replied, "Fasting is not about deprivation, Seraphine. It's about listening. When we remove distractions, even those of the body, we become more in tune with what God wants to show us." I decided to try. At first, I planned a simple fast, maybe a day or two, but something inside me said I needed more time. Pastor Gideon suggested that I seek specific guidance for my spiritual journey, so I started a water fast, something that seemed impossible to me, but surprisingly, the initial days passed more easily than I expected. On the seventh day, something changed. The physical weakness was evident. My muscles ached, my head felt heavy, but my mind was as clear as a summer day. I felt an inner strength that I had never experienced before. It felt like my soul was preparing for something big, although I didn't know what. That morning, I received an invitation to a prayer meeting at a small chapel in downtown Asheville. Despite my tiredness, I felt like I should go. I got in my car and started driving down the winding road that connected my cabin to the city. Sunlight streamed through the trees, and for a moment, the beauty of the landscape seemed to ease the weight I was carrying. But then suddenly I saw an out-of-control car coming towards me. The hit was so quick that I barely had time to process it. The sound of metal twisting, glass shattering, and the impact threw me into the darkness. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't like normal silence and with a slight hum or the distant sound of the wind. It was an absolute silence, so deep that it seemed to swallow everything around me. That's when I realized I was no longer in the car. I was floating. I remember looking down and seeing my own body trapped between the seat and the steering wheel. The paramedics desperately trying to open the car door to get to me. My face was covered in blood and my chest wouldn't move. And am I dead? I thought. But the idea didn't bring panic. Instead, I felt a strange, comforting peace, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. As I watched, one of the paramedics shouted, "She's in cardiac arrest. We need the defibrillator now." His words seemed distant, as if I were watching a scene from a movie. A woman approached the scene, crying and praying loudly. "Please God, save her," she cried, her voice full of despair. My heart sank at the sight of her. But before I could react, I felt something pulling me. It was as if an invisible force was lifting me away from the scene of the accident. I started to climb, and everything around me was enveloped in a golden light that became more and more intense. At first, I tried to resist, looking back, trying to hold on to what was happening below. But the force was irresistible. The feeling was not of fear, but of surrender. I knew something bigger was calling me. I passed through a kind of tunnel of light that pulsed as if it were alive. Each pulse felt like a note of music, a harmony so perfect it made my heart vibrate. The walls of the tunnel were translucent, and through them I could see flashes of images, people praying, others fasting, tears being shed. All of these scenes were connected by golden threads, as if they formed a huge living network. When I reached the end of the tunnel, I was enveloped by a feeling of love so intense that I almost fell apart. It was as if all the weight I had carried in life had been ripped away from me in an instant. On the horizon, a bright light awaited me, and I knew my journey was just beginning. As I crossed the end of the light tunnel, I was enveloped by an environment so magnificent that I almost lack words to describe it. It was as if I had arrived at a place that had always existed, but that my human mind could never fully comprehend. Everything around me seemed to pulse with life. The colors were more vibrant, the sounds had a heavenly harmony, and the air seemed filled with a peace that touched every part of me. The first thing that caught my attention were the golden threads that crossed the sky. They stretched from the horizon, plunging toward Earth like rays of light that turned into living strings. Each strand glowed brightly, pulsing with energy. I was drawn to them almost instinctively, as if I knew they were important. When I looked closer, I realized that each strand carried something. I saw faces, tears, prayers being whispered. One thread in particular caught my attention. A woman was kneeling, praying in tears, with fasting evident on her thin face. As he prayed, his golden thread glowed brightly, connecting directly to the light in the sky. These threads, they are people's prayers and fasts, I thought, as a spiritual understanding began to form within me. The voice came before I saw any figures. It was powerful, yet gentle, like a melody that went straight into my soul. "Seraphine, welcome," said the voice. I turned and saw a light so radiant that, for a moment, I thought I could not bear its intensity. But instead of blinding me, the light enveloped me in a feeling of pure love, as if I were being held in the arms of someone who had always known me. It was then that I realized I was standing before Jesus. It wasn't like the paintings or representations I had ever seen. He radiated authority but also humility. His eyes shone like fire, but conveyed a tenderness that made my tears flow without me even realizing it. "You are seeing the impact of fasting and prayer," he said, pointing to the golden threads. "These acts of surrender create spiritual openings, allowing my light to flow into the world. They are not just rituals, but a means of partnership between heaven and earth." I fell to my knees, unable to speak. He reached out and touched my head, and in that moment, a wave of spiritual truths washed over me. I saw stories of people who had transformed cities and even nations with their fasting. I understood that these threads not only connected earth to heaven, but also ushered in real spiritual change. As Jesus held his hand over my head, a flood of images, sounds, and sensations flooded my mind. It wasn't like learning something from a book or listening to someone talk. It was as if every truth was engraved directly into my soul. I became aware, clearly and unmistakably, of the transformative power of fasting, not just as a personal practice, but as a force capable of changing spiritual realities. "Seraphine," he began, his voice reverberating like soft thunder. "Fasting is not about punishment or sacrificing pain. He's about making space. When you fast, you create an opening in the spiritual mantle that covers the earth. It's like opening a window that allows divine light to flow freely." I then saw Moses on Mount Sinai, surrounded by resplendent light as he held the tablets of the 10 Commandments. I realized that his connection with God, at that moment, had been strengthened by 40 days of fasting. The scene changed, and I saw Daniel in Babylon, kneeling in prayer while fasting, facing spiritual and physical challenges that would have destroyed anyone else. I also saw Esther, whose courage to fast before presenting herself to the king had saved an entire people. "These stories are not just ancient records," Jesus continued. "They are living testimonies of the impact of fasting. Each act of surrender creates golden threads connecting the human to the divine. When done with humility and purity, fasting not only strengthens those who practice it, but transforms the spiritual atmospheres around it." I was then taken into a vision of ordinary people from different times and places whose fasts had altered the course of their communities. I saw a small town where a group of women had come together to fast and pray for weeks, turning the place into a beacon of spiritual revival. I have seen families reconciled, addictions broken, and even physical miracles happening as a direct result of these practices. "But be careful," Jesus warned, his expression becoming serious. "Not all fasting has spiritual relevance. When motivated by pride, competition, or religious obligation, it is empty, with no impact. The true power of fasting lies in complete surrender, in the genuine desire to align with divine purposes." His hand moved away, and he looked at me with an intensity that seemed to see every part of who I was. "You were chosen to witness this because the times to come will require courage and spiritual preparation. Teach others, Seraphine. Show them that fasting is not an obligation, but a partnership with heaven." I couldn't speak. The words were stuck in my throat, and only tears ran down my face. It was at that moment that I understood that my life would never be the same. After Jesus removed his hand from my head, I realized that the visions were not over. Once again, I was enveloped by golden light, but now it was mixed with something different, a shadow that seemed to move in the distance. Golden threads continued to shine, connecting heaven and earth, but some areas appeared blurry, as if they were under attack. The atmosphere changed, becoming thicker and thicker, like the air before a storm. Jesus turned to me, and his face was serious. "You have seen the power of fasting and prayer to open spiritual doors, but now you must understand something crucial. The more light you carry, the more attention you attract. Those who rise to fast and pray in humility become torches in the spiritual realm, visible not only to heaven, but also to the forces of darkness." A new vision appeared before me. I saw people fasting, their souls shining like stars, but all around them, shadows moved, trying to drown out their light. Some evil spiritual figures seemed to directly attack people, casting doubts, fear, and temptations upon them. Some resisted with prayers and remained steadfast, while others were consumed by fatigue or distraction, allowing their lights to dim. "This is why spiritual preparation is vital," Jesus explained. "Fasting is not just an act of sacrifice. It's a battle. Those who fast and pray with purpose are equipped with additional spiritual armor, making their prayers more precise and powerful. But they must be aware of the danger. It's a war, Seraphine, and no soldier goes into battle without preparation." In the vision, I saw something extraordinary. Those who persevered in their fasting and prayer were given spiritual weapons, swords made of light, golden shields that glowed with the strength of their faith. They were not alone. Angels surrounded them, helping them maintain their positions. "Fasting is not just for the individual," Jesus continued. "It's for those around them, for their families, their communities, their nations." I felt a deep pain when I realized the intensity of the attacks faced by those who dared to seek the divine, but at the same time, a flame of determination began to burn within me. "So fasting is like war?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's more than that," he replied. "It's preparation to resist what's to come, teach others how to fight with humility, faith, and perseverance." The visions began to fade, but the message was imprinted on me. I knew that when I returned, I would need to prepare others for this battle, a battle that was not just theirs, but that of all humanity. The golden light began to fade, and I felt like something was pulling me back. My body, which had previously seemed insignificant and distant, now commanded my attention with an almost physical urgency. It was as if my spirit was being pulled into a prison, bound by the pain, weight, and limitations of earthly existence. Before I completely disappeared from the celestial kingdom, I heard one last sentence from Jesus. "You are not finished yet, Seraphine. Come back and share what you saw. They need to know." His voice echoed in my mind as I fell, feeling a momentary emptiness before being enveloped again by the sensation of physical weight. The impact of returning to my body was abrupt. I opened my eyes with a deep gasp, as if I had been pushed to the surface after almost drowning. Everything seemed confusing. The hospital lights, the noise of machines, and the alarmed voices of the doctors around me. I heard someone say, "She's back. We have a pulse." The tone was one of surprise, almost disbelief. My head was spinning, and the pain was overwhelming. My chest burned like it was on fire, and each breath felt like a monumental effort. I tried to speak, but my words came out as an unintelligible mumble. The doctor in charge, who I later discovered was the Doctor Evelyn Marlowe, leaned closer to me, his eyes wide with shock. "Are you conscious? Can you hear me?" I nodded weakly. My mind was still torn between the heavenly realm I had just left and the earthly reality that now surrounded me. Tears started streaming down my face as I whispered, "I saw it. I saw Jesus." My voice was weak, but each word carried the truth of what had happened. The doctors around me exchanged quick glances, mixed between skepticism and curiosity. Dr. Marlowe, although visibly skeptical, seemed intrigued. "Let's stabilize her first," she said, trying to hide her disbelief as she adjusted the monitors around me. As I recovered over the next few hours, the memories of my celestial experience remained vivid, as clear as day. I knew something extraordinary had happened and that I had come back for a reason. Despite the physical pain and exhaustion, a new determination began to form within me. I had a mission now, a responsibility to share what I had seen and learned. In the days that followed, as my body miraculously recovered quickly, my heart burned with the need to share what I had experienced. My sister, Hannah, was the first to visit me in the hospital. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and when she saw me awake and conscious, she began to sob. I thought I lost you," she said, holding my hand so tightly she seemed afraid I would disappear again. "Hannah, I need to tell you something," I started, but she quickly interrupted. "Not now, Seraphine. You need to rest. We can talk about this later." But I knew I couldn't wait. What I had seen was too important to ignore. Then, with difficulty, I began to relate what had happened. I told about the celestial kingdom, the golden threads connecting earth to heaven, and Jesus' words about the transformative power of fasting. Hannah stared at me, her eyes mixing surprise and confusion. "Are you saying you saw Jesus? And did he speak to you about fasting?" I nodded, and tears started rolling down my face. "It wasn't just that, Hannah. He showed me how fasting and prayer open spiritual doors, how they are not just for us, but to change realities, heal wounds, and bring light to the world." She was silent for a long time, holding my hand as she processed what I was saying. Finally, he sighed. "I don't know if I can believe all of this, Aunt Seraphine, but you're alive, and that's already a miracle." A few days later, I received a visit from Pastor Gideon Vance. He entered the room with his typical calm air, but his expression became serious when he heard my story. Unlike Hannah, he didn't seem surprised. In fact, it seemed almost hopeful. "Seraphine, what you're telling me makes perfect sense. For years I have felt that fasting is being undervalued in the church. It is a powerful spiritual weapon, but many treat it as a simple tradition. You need to share this with others. What you experienced is a message for all of us." With Gideon's support, I began sharing my testimony at the small church in Asheville. At first, some people listened with skepticism, but others were deeply moved. Some started their own fasts, and the results were surprising. Marriages were restored, addictions broken, and even physical healings began to occur. The message I had received in heaven was beginning to manifest on earth. 3 months after my accident, my life had already completely changed. My testimony was transforming people in ways I never imagined. Small fasting and prayer groups began popping up in Asheville, and the stories I heard were inspiring. Families reconciled, illnesses healed, addictions broken. Even my sister, Hannah, who was initially skeptical, began participating in occasional fasts and saw changes in her own life. I knew something bigger was happening. One night, during a prayer meeting at church, I felt an intense presence in the room. People were holding hands, praying fervently. The energy in the room was palpable, as if the golden threads I had seen in the sky were connecting each of us. I closed my eyes and began to pray with a depth I had never felt before. It was as if my heart was in complete sync with something divine. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. My heart seemed to stop, and the world around me began to disappear. It was the same feeling of transition that I had experienced in the accident. Before I could understand what was happening, I was pulled back into that tunnel of golden light. This time, the journey was even more intense. The light at the end of the tunnel seemed brighter, and when I reached the celestial realm, I was greeted by a crowd of luminous figures. They were neither human nor angels, but something indescribable, like manifestations of pure light and music. They seemed to be singing a melody that I recognized but couldn't explain. Jesus appeared again, his presence even more radiant. "You are here because you need to see the fruits of what you started," he said, extending his hand toward a vision forming on the horizon. I saw cities being transformed, crowds gathering in prayer and fasting, with golden threads shining brightly among them. I saw people being healed, freed from spiritual oppression, and even rulers making fair decisions influenced by these prayers. "These are the fruits of your testimony," Jesus continued. "But this is just the beginning. Challenging times lie ahead, and spiritual preparation will be essential. Teach others not only to fast, but to do so with humility and purity of heart." I wanted to ask more, but my consciousness began to be pulled back to earth. Before leaving, Jesus spoke one last time. "What you began here is eternal. Keep going, Seraphine. My light is with you." I woke up on the floor of the church, surrounded by people from the meeting. They were in shock, crying and asking me what had happened. Despite my physical exhaustion, I stood up and said, with unshakable certainty, Heaven has called us to be light, and we need to respond. After the second experience, I felt an even greater weight in my heart. It was not a weight of anguish, but of responsibility. The visions that Jesus showed me, of transformed cities and healed people, seemed distant, but at the same time possible. Returning to earthly life this time was not just a miracle, it was a clear calling. I knew I couldn't carry everything alone. I needed others to also see the power of fasting and prayer. A few days later, I gathered Pastor Gideon and some church members to share my second experience. We were sitting in a small community hall. The atmosphere was charged with expectation, but also with doubt. Some people had already heard my previous testimony and were willing to listen, while others were still hesitant. I saw something that I need to share with you, I began, my voice carrying the emotion of what I had experienced. The second time I was in the heavenly kingdom, Jesus showed me the fruits of what we are doing here. He showed lives transformed, families restored, and even nations being changed by the power of prayer and fasting. But it also warned me that difficult times are coming, and we need to be prepared. A woman named Margaret raised her hand. She was a lady with decades of faith, known for her wisdom but also for her practical skepticism. You mean our fasting can change entire cities? Isn't it something too big for us simple people? I looked at her, and the words came from a strength I knew wasn't mine. Margaret, we don't do it. It's heaven. Every golden thread I saw connects our prayers and fasting to something much greater than we can understand. We don't need to be big, we just need to be faithful. Silence took over the room, but it was a different silence, full of reflection. Pastor Gideon then stood up and said, "Seraphine is right. The Bible gives us countless examples of how the faith and prayer of a few can transform many. Let's start with small group, 3-day fasts. We will see what God will do." In the months that followed, these small groups became spiritual flames. People began sharing testimonies. A husband who gave up alcohol, a woman healed of a chronic illness, a local school that saw violence drop dramatically after collective prayer. I saw the golden threads forming in real time, and it only reinforced my conviction. But the calling wasn't just for Asheville. Jesus had shown me something greater, something I didn't yet know how to achieve. The message was clear. Prepare yourselves for the spiritual challenges to come. The light you carry will be needed more than ever. The months that followed were transformative, not just for me, but for everyone around me. The small fasting and prayer groups grew, spreading throughout Asheville, and even reaching neighboring towns. What started as a low-key movement in a local church became something bigger than I could have imagined. It was as if the visions that Jesus had shown began to manifest before my eyes. With each meeting, stories of transformation accumulated. Margaret, the skeptical woman who had questioned the impact of fasting, came to me after a meeting with tears in her eyes. "I've never fasted before," she confessed, "but after 3 days, I saw my grandson, who was lost to drugs, knock on my door asking for help. He said he felt something different, as if a light had guided him to me. I held her hands and said, 'Margaret, this is the power of heaven working through you. Never doubt the impact a sincere prayer can have.' While the community flourished spiritually, my own heart faced moments of struggle. The responsibility of leading something so significant sometimes felt overwhelming. There were times when I wondered if I was worthy of carrying this mission. It was at these times that I turned to Jesus' words. "It's not about you, Seraphine. It's about what heaven can do through you." One of the most memorable moments came during a large prayer meeting organized by Gideon. The church was packed, with people coming from different parts of the state. In the middle of the meeting, a young woman stood up, shaking with emotion. "I wasn't going to talk," she began, "but I felt like I had to. I was planning to end my life, but I heard about this meeting and decided to come. I can't explain it, but I feel like a burden has been lifted from me. For the first time in years, I feel hope." Her words were like a ray of light in the room. As she spoke, I felt that divine presence again, as if golden threads were connecting each of us in that moment. Many people were crying, and others began to pray out loud. It was evident that something spiritual was happening, something that transcended our human capabilities. But there was a greater calling that still resonated in my mind. Prepare yourselves for the times to come. I knew the work wasn't complete. There was more to be done, more people to reach, and bigger challenges ahead. However, now I saw everything with new eyes. It wasn't about my strengths or abilities, but about the divine partnership that had been established. Today, Looking back, I see how the accident that almost took my life was, in fact, the beginning of a new journey. The power of fasting, sincere prayers, and surrender to divine purpose transformed not only my life, but that of everyone around me. I learned that we are not alone, that our actions have an impact on the spiritual realm, and that even in our weakest moments, divine light can shine through us. My mission continues, and as long as I have breath, I will share what I saw, felt, and learned. Because every golden thread that connects earth to heaven is a reminder that we are all, in some way, connected to the divine. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.